We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad.
Let us understand, North Vietnam cannot defeat or humiliate the United States. Only Americans can do that.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 12 of The Moral Minority. I, as always, am your not-so-humble correspondent, Marcel, and this is my co-host, Dan. Say hi, Dan.
Hi, Dan.
All right, Dan, here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about why Orange Man is bad, and then we're going to talk about Democrats, why they're bad too, the Liberty Movement, and why they're innocently bad in a sort of dopey child way, then the media, and why it's bad, and then, of course, why the world, in general, is also bad. We have nothing but good vibes here on The Moral Minority, so I want you to say everything with a smile.
I'll try to do that.
All right. As always, folks, our bi-weekly schedule creates some interesting observations, and in particular, as Dan and I, but mainly me, work to compile news articles for discussion, it's interesting to see what was news the day I put it on the list and what stopped being news by the time we started to record. And so what happened was 2 weeks ago, Trump was accused of rape again. I believe this is the 22nd time. But the woman's name is E. Jean Carroll, who accused Donald Trump of raping her in, I think, like a department store.
In a dressing room of, I forget the name of the department, some fancy department store. Bergdorf Goodman.
I don't even know what that is.
They sell like Prada and Gucci and all that stuff. Dolce & Gabbana.
Well, there were two things that were interesting about this. The first one was that apparently, at least according to American Thinker, her story was pulled straight from an episode of Law & Order.
Or maybe that episode of Law & Order was pulled from her own life.
And secondly, it was a very strange interview that she gave Anderson Cooper, which I will link to you. But basically, she told Anderson Cooper on CNN during an interview, because, of course, when a woman says Donald Trump sexually abused her, that gets you at least an hour of coverage on CNN in prime time. And she said during this interview,
I was not thrown on the ground and ravished. Which the word rape carries so many sexual connotations. This was not sexual. It hurt.
Well, I think most people think of rape as it is a violent assault. It is not.
I think most people think of rape as being sexy.
Let's take a short break.
Think of the fantasies.
We're just going to take a quick break. If you can stick around, we'll talk more on the other side.
Which is, on the one hand, the strangest thing you could have said to Anderson Cooper on CNN. But
slightly stranger was when she hit on Anderson Cooper.
Yes, despite knowing full well that Anderson Cooper does not play for that team. But that choice of words does, in a way, make me think that her story is legit. Because that's not a rehearsed statement. Do you know what I mean?
I actually agree with you. I think this is a case of her lack of credibility makes her more credible.
Yeah.
Because if you were going to make this up, this is not how you would do it at all.
I would, yeah. If I were trying to work together, if I were trying to work out a conspiracy to defame Donald Trump, I definitely would not tell, the face of this campaign to, by the way, make sure that you bring up the idea of a rape fantasy. I definitely would not.
In defense of her, again, in more defense of her credibility, sometimes people are crazy because things happen to them that damage them. And then 30 years later, they seem like crazy people.
This all doesn't matter because the accusation was on June 24th. The Anderson Cooper interview was on June 25th. And by June 27th, nobody cared.
By the way, listeners, I bet you did not expect us to take that position on this.
Listen, we stand for justice and human rights here on the Moral Minority Podcast. We're a progressive podcast free of hate.
A progressive podcast free of hate. That is I got to put that in the description.
Sure. But yeah, by June 27th, though, nobody cared. Right? This news became old just like that. One of the few, accusations against Donald Trump that my instincts say, this one might actually be true, and nobody cared about it.
Yes.
We will later on in this episode discuss another sexual assault allegation against Donald Trump that was kind of credible, but let's not move too quickly.
One rape at a time.
One rape at a time. Speaking of unfortunate off-the-cuff statements, Donald Trump was making a speech to the Faith and Freedom Coalition. One of his many duties as a Republican president is to speak at a variety of events for various right-wing organizations of equally varying levels of potency. And the Faith and Freedom Coalition, I'm guessing, is it's clearly some kind of Christian organization, probably a pro-life thing, fighting not to bake cakes for gay people. It doesn't matter. But it doesn't matter because Donald Trump was choosing to use a speech to talk about the vote on the Affordable Care Act. And this is what Donald Trump said.
Congress, where we had the Senate and we had wonderful congressmen. We had the House of Representatives and the Senate. But we didn't have enough votes because it was very close. We needed 60 votes. And we had 51 votes. And sometimes, we had a little hard time with a couple of them, right? Fortunately, they're gone now. They've gone on to greener pastures. Or perhaps far less green pastures, but they're gone. They're gone, Bill. Very happy they're gone.
Many news outlets picked up the obvious subtext, which is that Donald Trump just implied very happily that John McCain, who was the vote that he was the defecting Republican who stopped the ACA from being repealed, that Donald Trump is happy that John McCain is, quote, gone now and has moved on to greener pastures or perhaps less green pastures, i.e. John McCain has died and gone to hell. And Donald Trump is very happy about that.
Aren't we all?
Aren't we all? Let me just say, for that, nothing but respect for hashtag my precedent. And he keeps doing this.
Yeah, this is the closest he's come in I don't know how long to making a statement that rose to the level of like a national controversy. Yeah, I don't even know did this rise to the level of a national controversy?
No, not really.
I don't think this will be like the one of those statements that like grab him by the etc. or blood coming out of there, wherever that people repeat. People on the street will say, "Oh, wow, this was horrible." I feel like this was just a media thing. It blipped on the radar and it was gone.
Yes, it was news for a day.
Which, by the way, does that say anything about whether or not, to get back to the whole 3D chess thing, whether or not Trump's ability to say things which become a national controversy is a strategy, or at the very least is under his control? Because it seems like he has not done any of that for a while. And my prediction is that once the presidential campaign rolls around, he might start doing it again.
Just saying things that become enduring controversies?
Yes.
I think it's just a matter of just since it's not the season for it. So the media, they're obviously going to bring it up each time it happens, but there's no real reason to hype it up because the only reason you hype it up is because you think it'll hurt his election chances. So what I think will happen, if any of these statements are felt to be long-term damaging, all that will happen is just during the first presidential debate, whoever the Democrats put up there, they'll just say, I don't know why we should vote for a man who said, June 5 months ago that John McCain was probably in hell, right?
Isn't that that's another great thing that Trump does. This is something Scott Horton talks about, which is for libertarians, it's useful to always attack the right from the right and the left from the left. So you don't when you're making an argument against something from the right, you don't just parrot the left-wing talking point. You make a different type of argument that outflanks the right on the right and says, this war is too expensive. It adds to the national debt. You don't say...
I always find that a little weird, though. But
yeah, that is a bad example, but you get my point.
Yeah. I'm sure it's rhetorically effective. It just rubs me personally the wrong way.
And Trump is doing a similar thing where now he puts Democrats in the position of clutching their pearls and saying, can you believe that John McCain, who I think AOC called like one of our greatest Americans or whatever, he would imply that John McCain is in hell. This is the same John McCain who 10 years ago was on the cover of Newsweek in a what now would be called a doctored photo that made him look like a literal vampire with weird lighting. And he was called a racist every day, despite the fact that he has children who are not white. Like, now he's become sainted. Which brings me back to the question I've asked before, which is, do you think this will eventually happen with Trump? You think one day, President, Republican, whatever, will make a comment and they'll say, oh, Donald Trump would never have said this. If only we could have those days
return
back.
Dignity back to the presidency in the days of Trump. I mean, I'm sure that it'll kind of happen once we get back to because especially with this, well, we'll get to this in a second, this kowtowing to dictators thing.
Let's get to it.
Sure, yeah. So, speaking of foreign policy victories and returning dignity to the office, Donald Trump met with Kim Jong-un. He arranged the meeting through a tweet. Trump tweeted, quote, "After some very important meetings, including my meeting with President Xi of China, I will be leaving Japan for South Korea with President Moon. While there, if Chairman Kim of North Korea sees this, I would meet him at the border /DMZ just to shake his hand and say hello." And then there was a question mark and then an exclamation point. And this was apparently the first time North Korean state, like the North Korean, I don't want to call them the State Department, Foreign Ministry, had even heard any suggestion of this. But sure enough, a meeting was made and Donald Trump was there at the DMZ. He shook hands with Kim Jong-un and then he stepped across the concrete. It's not even a barrier. It's like just a concrete.
It's like a curb.
Yeah, it's like he stepped over the curb into the wrong side of town. He stepped into North Korea, and then Trump and Kim walked back into South Korea.
This is one of those things where you have to say, literally, he's the only president who could have done it.
Yep.
And who would have done it. No other president would have said, what if I just fired off a tweet and just added Kim Jong-un on Twitter and was like, hey, I'm going to be in the area if you want to hang out. Anyone else would have, that's not how meetings are done.
Yes.
It's months of back and forth and channels and all this stuff, and then eventually somebody makes an announcement. This was not even a president move. This was like a rock star move. You just wanted him to materialize, and he materialized.
This was not totally off the cuff, though.
This was attacked.
Yeah. Trump made two preparations before he did this. One, he had Tucker Carlson with him during this. Ostensibly, Carlson was in China to report on the G20 summit for Fox News, but it is more. It's a pretty fortuitous coincidence that America's number one isolationist on cable news was there to be with Trump while he organized a surprise meeting with Kim Jong-un. But you know who wasn't there? John Bolton. John Bolton.
Where pray tell was John Bolton?
John Bolton was in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. The Guardian tried to be polite. The Guardian said that John Bolton was either sent or sent himself to Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. Listen, nobody sends themselves to Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia.
Yeah, and even if, why would he do that? As a protest?
Right.
No one would care.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Maybe John Bolton was there because the Mongols, the few empires to successfully invade Iran, he just wanted some tips.
You know what's funny is that this is the kind of thing that would actually be news in a world where there's no Trump derangement syndrome. In a normal political climate, this would be the news. It's oh wow, there's this disagreement about foreign policy in the White House, and Trump is making these moves, and he sent Bolton away, and what does that mean? But nobody cares because they're too busy just tearing their hair out at everything Trump does. So now what was the condemnation of this? It was on the one hand, Trump's kowtowing to dictators. On the other hand, this is weak and dangerous, and the usual neocon dumb guy argument that we can't meet with the head of this third world country because somehow I was seeing on TV Democratic strategists explaining that this is a great PR moment for Kim Jong-un, who now has legitimacy and something, even though he's a dictator and can kill his opposition at his whim. I don't think he needs to appeal to the masses. And even if he were going to, this would not be the way to do it, since U.S. presidents have been demonized in North Korea to the point where they're considered something akin to human devils.
Well, that's interesting. So there is a video which purports to be a North Korean propaganda release that was on North Korean state TV. And it talks about the meeting and, how great Kim Jong-un is for